Today, November the 11th, 2009, we celebrate Veterans Day. When I was young, we celebrated Armistice Day. I remember a cold, sleety, rainy November 11th when my brother Philip played taps on the public square in the morning at 11 o'clock to honor those who had fallen. But the war to end all wars, World War I, did not end all wars. And we soon were engaged in the Second World War. Eli Simon was my brother Philip's age, just old enough to fight in the Second World War. Right after Eli finished basic training, he paid a visit to Mr. Fryerson's aeronautics class. I remember sitting by him and looking at his face, his eyes blinking, his brand new Army uniform looking too big for him. Eli stayed with us the whole period, and at the end, when we went our separate ways, we all said goodbye to Eli. It wasn't a month later that we received word that Eli had been killed in action in Italy. If you were to look at a map of Darlington County, South Carolina, you would see Billy Farrar Road. Lieutenant William G. Farrar piloted the 16th plane to take off from the deck of the carrier Hornet as it took them as close as possible to Japan. He and his crew made their bombing run and headed toward China. Running out of fuel on the coast of China, they were forced to bail out. They were captured by the Japanese, where they were brutally treated. They were tried, not knowing why they were being tried. And Billy Farrar and two others were sentenced to death. They were taken out and made to kneel before three white crosses. Lieutenant Billy Farrar, Lieutenant Dean Hallmark, and Sergeant Harold Spatz. They were shot and killed. Billy Farrar had been given writing materials before he was taken out, and he wrote a letter to his mother saying, "Just remember, God will make everything right, and that I'll see you again in the hereafter." That letter was not mailed during the time of the war. It was found in papers after the war was over. Elliot Williams grew up in Darlington. He went to St. John's High School. At the age of 16, he enlisted in the United States Navy and served in Korea and Vietnam. In Vietnam, he was in command of two patrol boats on the Mekong Delta when they spotted two Vietnamese sampans. They dispatched the crew of one, but the other escaped up a canal. And they followed and soon found themselves under heavy fire from both sides of the river. They returned the fire. They called in helicopter support, and as it got dark, the fight lasted 3 hours. As it got dark, they used their searchlights to pinpoint the Viet Cong positions, And after the end of the battle, they discovered they had sunk or destroyed 65 enemy vessels and killed many of the enemy. For this action, James Elliott Williams was awarded the Medal of Honor. He later became a U.S. Marshal and died in 1999. I mentioned Armistice Day. In 1918, in October of 1918, my father Dean Stanley Hartley and his brother, my uncle Paul Livingston Hartley, served with Company L of the 18th Infantry Regiment of the 30th Division, the Old Hickory Division. On December the 8th, my Uncle Paul occupied a forward position. Many of his squad members had been either killed or wounded, and he was firing a Lewis gun at the enemy, causing them to keep their heads down. An artillery shell exploded nearby, burying him. He dug himself out, continued to fire his Lewis gun. Another shell hit. He was buried the second time. He dug himself out and continued to fire his Lewis gun until he ran out of ammunition. He picked up the Lewis gun, advanced on the enemy, causing 20 of their members to surrender. 9 days later, October 17th, 1918, my father, who was a sergeant, took charge of his company when his company commander was killed, and for a night and day he directed his company as it achieved its objective, and he accounted for 5 of the enemy. My Uncle Paul was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his action. My father was awarded the Silver Star. Uncle Paul was also given the Medal Militaire, a Croix de Guerre, and both were awarded by the English government the Distinguished Conduct Medal, which is second only to the Victoria Cross. After the war, they were men of peace. My father became a Methodist minister. Uncle Paul became a businessman. Who was that boy who died in the war? Who was that boy who died so young? Who was that boy? Who was that boy? Who was that boy? Who was that boy whose mother cried, whose father stood with pride? Who was that boy a sweetheart kissed as she said a sad goodbye? Who was that boy? Who was that boy? Who was that boy? Which was the war that killed that boy, the one who died so young? Which was the war that killed that boy, whose mother wept, whose father stood with pride? Which was the war that killed that boy a sweetheart kissed as she said a sad goodbye? Which was the war? Which was the war? Or is it yet to come?